So thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I would like to present myself. My name is Petra Unger. I'm a gender expert. I studied feminist theories and gender studies in the Rosa Mayreder College, which today doesn't exist anymore. I'm very sorry for it. It was a wonderful window of opportunity I was able to use and to study this wonderful, to join this wonderful study, edited and guided by Ursula Kubis-Hoffmann. I'm also a so-called tourist guide. That means that I do city walks, and formerly I did some city tours with buses and with tourists, normally in Spanish. This is my second language. And so if I'm searching for English words and I have some strange words or sentences, please, I apologize from the moment on. So what I would like to give you a short overview of my work and also an idea of what kind of contribution feminist theory and about all to study biographies can have very important input also for Austro-Marxist theories or the history of Austro-Marxism, together with feminist theories and the history of women. So my title was "Where Have All the Women Gone? Women and Austro-Marxism in Vienna." That means that I'm sure that most of all of you know the names and the stories of the women I will mention now in my short introduction, but I would like to mention their name anyway, in case that some of them are not very well known. So as you can see from the left to the right, you can see Margaret Hilferting. She was the wife of Rudolf Hilferting. You can see Leiter, of course, very well known. You can see the next with the glasses. This is Aline Furtmüller. She was a teacher in Vienna together with Karl Furtmüller. Then the next line, you have Vesa Canetti, one of the most important writers of the times of the 20s, together with Else Feldmann, one of the few women who really were able to describe the real living situation of people in Vienna, of the working class, and about all the working class women. Then we have Wanda Lanza. Wanda Lanza was the daughter of Helene Bauer. And the last but not least, Alice Rühle Gastle. I'm sorry, I have to take some papers I have here. Yes. So Aline, I'm sorry. Aline Rühle was Alice Rühle Gastle. Also was, I think, a very important theorist, not so much a theorist than trying to live the Austro-Marxist ideas or the socialist ideas in their everyday life and their own profession. So this is the focus I would like to take. What about the theories and what about the living conditions of women, trying to bring it down to earth, the ideas in the everyday life? So before I start with the few or these different women, and I would like to give you only a short interpretation of the biographies of these women, not tell the biographies now because we don't have so much time. I would like to mention a few basic theories or ideas of my input, which means that women have always played an active role in history, I think also in Austro-Marxist history. Women's contributions and accomplishments have largely been overlooked and consequently omitted from mainstream culture and history. And the third point of view is, so from this basis on, we are talking about women's history. I would like to give you some, some illustration, for example, why women's contributions are consequently omitted in the culture of history. Well, just take in account that less than 10% of the names in the city of Vienna, for example, are dedicated to women. We have only 4 or 5 figures remembering women in Vienna, monuments, whole body monuments in Vienna. And the history of women are barely known, which means that most of the women and children or girls are not learning at school, when women had got the right to vote, who was the first minister in Austria in the highest, or the first women in the highest positions, who were the theoreticians or the politically important women, for example, of the 1920s. So if I mention Leiter, if I mention Margaret Hilferting, nobody knows these women here in Austria, even though we have some streets or some places, some commemorative plaques in the city, but the majority never heard about their story. So what I would like to talk also is not only how to be seen or how to make them seen a little bit more, or make them more present in our history or in our recent or practice life. I would like to mention also some feminist theories which I consider are very important, and I think that these women I would like to mention now were a kind of pioneers, so to say, of intersectionality. I would like to explain that in a few words, in a few minutes. So the first theory I would like to mention, I consider very important, is the so-called dual socialization of women. What does that mean? That means a double alignment of women, which is inherently contradictory in terms of working process, hierarchies, and recognition of the work. The theory of dual socialization describes the fact that women's lives are still based on family work and have to face, or family and work, and have to face the segregation of professions and professional hierarchies according to gender aspects. So women live in two different worlds, often difficult to organize and barely compatible. In the world of employment and in the world of care work they are living. These conditions have an impact on psychological level, social, economical, and political level. The concept of dual socialization today is extended with the concept of intersectionality. Intersectionality identifies multiple factors of advantage and disadvantage, and how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. Well, the woman who named this phenomenon and this paradigm was Kimberly Williams Greenshaw. She realized that some phenomena of discrimination are not able to be seen if you don't have the word, and if you don't take in account that there is not only one discrimination point, that there can be more. So it's possible to see, for example, the discrimination of a woman earning less money than less wages than a man, but perhaps you don't see the racist implication of the entrepreneur in their working place, for example. So this was the starting point of Kimberly Greenshaw, and I think it's a little bit interesting, or it's interesting for us, and it's important for us looking to the idea I would like to propose you. So one of the next point of view I would like to mention, studying biography, the history of biography, or dedicating a researcher who is dedicating his work to research of biography normally is a little bit discriminated also. It sounds in the history science like less exact, less interesting, less scientific at least. So therefore, it's a huge discrimination of the studies on biographies, even though reading and studying biographies of women in history empowers especially girls and women. And in my opinion, reading and studying biographies of women could broaden the view of men and male researchers, and also of political theorists. So if we talk about the research of biographies, I would like to show you the main questions I do in my researches, and it's a main question how to ask in the research for the history of women. What is this woman known for, first of all? What struggles did this person face? How did she overcome hardships and barriers because of gender? And in which women's networks she lived and worked? Why these questions are so important? Normally, women are considered as the wife of Rudolf Hilferting, the wife of Otto Bauer, and so on, but barely seen as an own personality with own networks, with own struggles and with own special gender-based structures who offer some possibilities or close the radius of activities of her. So to think about how these women are connected and how each personal life story is part of a larger community story normally is very well known and very well done by men. So you know the networks of men, but barely you know the networks of women. So with these basic ideas or this introduction to the work, to the theory, to research, to biographies, I would like to start with Käthe Leiter, of course known by everybody in your circle. She was an Austrian economist, she was a women's rights activist, journalist and politician. She was member of the Social Democratic Party of Austria and Viennese labor chamber, and she was detained in Ravensbrück concentration camp during the Nazi regime and killed by gas at the Bernburg Euthanasia Center in 1942. Born as a second daughter of a Jewish couple, the lawyer Josef Pick and his wife Lotte Rubinstein, and her elder sister was the Austrian-American composer and music therapist Wally Weigel. Käthe graduated first from the Beamtentöchter Lyceum, it's so-called women's or girls' school in 1914, and subsequently began studying political sciences at the University of Vienna. But in that time, Austrian women were not allowed to graduate, so she had to transfer to the German Heidelberg University in 1917. She graduated then there in July 1918. So when we have a first view on this biography, only these very few points of the biography, you have different sections talking with the intersectionality, you have different sections of her life. She was Jewish. So this was in the first moment an advantage because Jewish families offered their girls the possibility to study. It was always very highly renowned and important for Jewish families that also girls are able to study. So the second one is that she was a woman. She was not able to finish her study here in Austria because it was not possible. So just to give you an idea, in 1365, the Viennese University was one of the eldest founded university in Europe. And recently, in 1897, women had the right to study. So until the last faculty opened up its doors, it took till 1945. This was the Catholic faculty on the University of Vienna. So it was a really obstacle and really difficult for her life and her education. She had to move to Germany to to graduate then in 1918. In spite of that, she came back and a part of it, and beside her studies, she started as a young woman to involve herself in different left-wing organizations. When the Republic of Austria was founded in 1918, she was one of the first Austrian women politically graduated in political sciences and specialized in economics. So she was really, really a pioneer, and she was at least part, as you very well know, of the scientific staff of Otto Bauer. So Leiter joined the Frauenreferat in the women's department of the Viennese institutionalized workers' chamber in 1925 and led the department until 1934. She published articles and reports based on statistical data, and her most important work was the Handbook of Women's Work, where she invited different women working in different factories and fields to talk and write about their working lives. I think this was really a pioneer work because nobody before asked the people. So this was a really bottom-up kind of research, historical research she did, and it was not so easy. So we have another disadvantage. So she was a so-called bourgeois. She came from an upper class family. She had studied, so there was a great mistrust of the working women, and she had to struggle a lot to be accepted as a real woman on the side of the working class people. At least she published her Handbook of Women's Work, which today is one of the most important fountains for us to research about the women's situation in the 1920s or 30s. So she also gave lectures, school courses, radio broadcasts to advocate for women's rights. She argued for equal pay, the hiring of more women in social administration and employment opportunities for university-educated women. So as I mentioned before, if there were a lot of theorists, normally men, there were a lot of women on the other side of the thinking part of the society who tried to put down on earth what they have studied and to try to practice what theory could offer. I don't say that this really worked, as I listened before the last few words of Mr. Kretke, somehow not that it was not possible to bring everybody to the ground of the reality of the people, but I think they tried to do that. So this, I would like to finish my interpretation of the biography of Käthe Leiter, and I feel very honored to be one of the women who has the Käthe Leiter Prize because of the gender studies. So we remember, or I personally remember a lot and work a lot with her works in my profession. So I would like to mention another Austrian-American historian, Gerda Lerner. She wrote about Leiter and she said, she personifies the highest idols of feminism, lifelong activity on behalf of all women, but especially working class women. Conviction that social reforms are only just if they serve the interests of women as well as men, uncompromising struggle against fascism and National Socialism, which costs her life. So this was the description of Gerda Lerner, remembering Käthe Leiter. So the next woman I would like to present is Margaret Hilferting. Margaret Hilferting first worked as a teacher, and this was quite typical for the women in this time. They were able to go to school, private schools normally, so this was only, so education was offered only for privileged women and privileged girls. So she went to a private school, and to the bourgeois women, it was offered only a very reduced kind of work or professions, like, for example, teacher or housemaid, or working in as a writer, perhaps, like Marie von Ebner-Eschenbach, for example, but never in factories or studying on the university. So Margaret Hilferting, again, was one of the first women who studied, and she had to suffer the same, or quite the same, as Käthe Leiter. She did the external matura, studied first on the faculty of philosophy, because to study medicine was not allowed for women. And when they opened up the door in 1900, she started to study. Totally different the situation of her former or later husband. Rudolf Hilferting was able to study from the very first beginning. There was never a discussion that he was able to go to the university. He finished his study also as physician. Later, he became the known Marxist economist and social theorist, politician, and chief of the chief theoretician of the Social Democratic Party of Germany during the Weimar Republic, as you know. But in the case of Margarete, it was not so easy the way, and not so directly the way, and it was not so easy to do what she wanted to do. So she married him. She moved with him to Berlin in 1906, when he gave up his job as a doctor following August Bebel's call, starting teaching economics and economic history at the training center of the SPD in Berlin. In 1905 and 1908, her sons, Karl and Peter, were born. And for Margarete, soon it was clear that she has no possibilities in Berlin to manage her work and her career in a city without any social infrastructure for her. So it was really necessary to go back to Vienna, to have the support of their social surroundings. And a little bit later, as a single mom working there in Vienna, she started her own, she starts to practice as a gynecologist like other women who studied medicine. Also, some were pediatricians and others were gynecologists. It was quite difficult also for the women to come into other parts of the medicines, to take other interests, to have other interests, like, for example, pathology or other kinds of forms of researches. So she started to work, and she intentionally has chosen the 10th district as her place to practice as a gynecologist. And she published also a lot of texts about women's rights, about reproductive rights for women. And it's my personal opinion that I think she offered also abortion in her practice in the 10th district, because we can conclude of her text and her personal life and her political conviction that she did it even though it was illegal, even though it was quite dangerous to offer this. So I think she helped a lot of women in this time as a doctor. She also was a doctor at school, which was a very normal working place for the first physicians, female physicians here in Austria. So in 1922, she got divorced. She was very shocked about that because she had a relatively intense friendship with her husband, even though they were living in different towns. And she was very shocked when he really wanted the divorce for her. She had a great crisis after that. And another very hard situation for her, totally convinced of the socialist ideas and the ideas she intentionally followed in her career life. She was a kind of shocked when she realized that her son entered to the Jesuit order. So he became totally religious. And the other one took a lot of time to start living by his own. So this is one of the most moving texts I've ever read, is one of the letters she has written to her sons before her deportation. And there she mentions also that she is still today, still in this situation, and her very, how to say, precarious situation, convinced that an open-minded life and a life to dedicate it to a better situation, a better society, always was her great, for herself, was a great help. And she offered all the liberty of thinking also to her sons. So I would like to invite you to read these letters and texts of Margaret Hilferting. I think she was one of the greatest women we had here in Austria. So I'm going on a little bit, I try to be a little bit faster, and only would like to mention some names and what I consider is very important to know, why it's important to know her. So we have here Alice Rühle-Gastle. Alice Rühle-Gastle is a very good example how women in this time were engaged in the theories, Austro-Marxist or socialist theories in their times, but they tried to combine it with other movements, intellectual movements or intellectual ideas, like, for example, the individual psychology of Alfred Adler. Oh, I forgot to mention before that Margarete Hilferting was the first woman who was able to participate in the so-called Wednesday sessions of Sigmund Freud. So she also was looking for a combination or a connection between different theories and different solutions also in this field. So Alice Rühle-Gastle, she was very interested in the theories or in the ideas of Alfred Adler. Alfred Adler and Sigmund Freud, as you know, got totally divided, and there was a hard discussion between them. Sigmund Freud wanted to be more scientific, which means in the term of natural sciences. Alfred Adler wanted to take in account that, in his opinion, the main motives of human thought and behavior are individual, men striving for superiority and power, partly in compensation for his feeling of inferiority. So for him, the most important fact that leads human thoughts or behaviors is the feeling of inferiority. Well, this was discussed very intensively. That was very discussed also in the writings of Alice Rühle-Gastle. I think one of the other very important point of view of Alfred Adler was that that people can become psychologically ill because of their social situation. And that's a great problem also, that if you have a great deprivation, that there is also, as we know in the texts of the Bisa Canetti, for example, there's also a very high level of domestic violence against women and children. So these were topics mentioned by Alfred Adler, taken in account by Alice Rühle-Gastle, and combining these with the theories she was in touch. So Alice Gastle attended a girls' school in Dresden. She came from Germany, then, she was born in Prague, went then to Germany. She was a German Jewish writer, feminist, and psychologist. And she lived more than 10 years in Germany, then came back to Prague. I think it's also very important, as I mentioned before, networks. And I would like to mention that Alice Rühle-Gastle had a great and deep friendship with Milena Jesenska. Milena Jesenska normally generally is known by her contact with a man, which is called Franz Kafka. But less people know that she was a Czech journalist, she was a writer, she was a great editor and translator, and she worked with prestigious Czech magazines and feminist journals in her time. She also was deported to a concentration camp to Ravensbrück, and there she died for a kidney failure in 1944. Well, Alice Rühle, as a socialist, also was no longer saved at the beginning of the Nazi rule in Germany. So she returned to her native city in Prague. She worked on the children's supplement of the Prague Tagblatt, and finally has written this time in her autobiographical novel, The Umbruch and the Freiheit of Hannah, and the change and the freedom of Hannah. So after a few years, she left Prague and she followed her husband to Mexico, who had family there. So in Mexico, she worked as a translator in a government office and a trade journalist. And despite of the friendships with Trotsky, Frida Kahlo, Diego Rivera, and Mexico, she never felt comfortable there. And at least she ended up committing suicide on the day of the death of her husband in June 1943. And it's very tragical that her theories and her thinkings, she, so to say, renounced of her own thinkings. She was so desperate in the situation of Mexico. So she is one of the examples that going to the exile, we have in the biography research, the findings that women often were more able to adapt to the new situation, to manage the new situation. They often learned quickly the language, they found some work, they supported their men and so on, and easier than some men. But this is the case where Alice Rühle-Gastle did everything, like I mentioned before, but at least she struggled with the exile, and she had no way out without her husband to live there in Mexico. She never could get a foot on the ground, so to say, in Mexico, even though she had friends there and she had intellectual contacts, and she had her work would have been possible to write, to do something. Well, this was Alice Rühle-Gastle, and I would like to mention only with a few words Aline Furtmüller, and with the only fact, Aline Furtmüller was the daughter of Samuel Klatschko, which was a Russian Marxist, and had a very great circle of friends and intellectuals all around him, very, very tense in relationship with the family Trotsky, Polanyi, and with Alfred Adler. And Aline Furtmüller was raised in this situation, which was wonderful for her. If we read her biography, she says, I'm translating it in my mind literally, she said, till when she became an adult young woman, she had the idea that a very good person is only one who was once in prison fighting for a better world. So it was her very young idealistic idea formed in this circle of her family all around Samuel Klatschko. So she became a teacher and she tried to combine the ideas she lived and she had in her family with her pedagogical life. They had also to flee for the National Socialist because of the National Socialist system. And Aline Furtmüller, together with Karl, took both sons of Käthe Leiter with them. So they saved the lives, or they looked for them during the exile. So I would like to talk only about Vesa Canetti. And would not like to mention Wanda Lanza now to finish my short input. I would like to present Vesa Canetti in a short mention, or in a short way. She was an Austrian novelist, playwright, and short story writer. And together with Else Feldmann, as I mentioned before, among others, she became a regular contributors of short stories and essays to the newspaper of the Arbeiterzeitung and publishing numerous novels and dramas. Their willingness to depict vividly the stark poverty and the harsh violence pervasive in Viennese family life, as well as the emphasis on the constantly shifting boundaries between their characters, public and private lives, and the borders of class-based sections in the city, did so much to illuminate the complexities of urban life and women's life, I would like to add. So therefore, the examination of Vesa Canetti's and Else Feldmann's writings also reveals a complicated web of interrelation between socialist and Jewish identities in Red Vienna. And I think we should study or have a new look on their works, which are very important in my personal point of view for the relationship. And there's a new research finding in Switzerland, in Zurich, which sees a very, very strong relationship between Austro-Marxism and the writings of Vesa Canetti. I think it's really worthy to read these new scientific works we have today. So I would like to finish now. I hope I was able to give you an idea of the intersectional parts of the lives of women, reading and studying biographies of women, once again with the new glasses of intersectionality, and trying to work out their networks, their obstacles, their opportunities, because of being women in different societies, Jewish women, married women, older, elderly women, all these aspects together, politically engaged women. So I think it's a very good or new idea to have a look on these biographies, and I would like to invite you to broaden your view in the history with these women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Petra Unger. We have 10 minutes for questions. So I would like to open the floor for questions. Do we have any contributions, questions? Michael Kretke has a question, please.
Thank you very much, Petra Unger, for your excellent presentation. I like very much the biographical approach, which should be used much more often, much more extensively in research into the history of the labor movement and all the social movements. Well, because we only have a little bit of time, and I do not have any issue with what you said, except as a British professor, of course, I know the intersectionality, and I would have a lot of comments on that, but just drop it. It's much more interesting to stick with the biographies. And one of my favorites, apart from Leiter, is Wanda Lanza. Perhaps you would be able to say a little bit more about her in 5 minutes? So make good use of our time.
Well, I try to. I think one of the most important traces she left here in Vienna, or Wanda Lanza, was the idea to give education to the working class people, to give them the possibility to access higher education. So, and to design a special kind of school where they can study after their work and get higher education. Till today, we have this school. Until today, we have this possibility for working class people to get higher education in spite of their working process, which means that they are working during the day and in the evening they are studying. And we see now that this designed wonderful educational system helps also some younger people who stops with education during the crisis of the pubertät. How do you say pubertät? Help me, please. The adolescence. What the young people today in this school like is that they are treated like adults, not like children. So this is the inherence of Wanda Lanza. Wanda Lanza suffered a very difficult situation before her exile. Her husband disappeared. The family does not know, I think, till today, what happened with him. There was a Gestapo visit in the department. He was not there. The children were able not to say where he is, because I think he went to the apartment of some friends, and then he disappeared. Nobody knows what happened with him. He committed suicide or whatever, or he was murdered. We don't know. So she moved with her 2 daughters to, I think, Denmark or Sweden. Please help me. I think it was Sweden, where she was able to survive with her children. She had a lot of. She spoke a lot of different languages, which helped after the Second World War to help survivors of the concentration camps. There's so many people who were not able to move back or to talk about their lives and to get some status, some national status and so on. So she was very important to help these people. And she never felt at home, I think, in Sweden. She always wanted, or first she didn't want to come back, I think, and then she wanted to go back when she became a little bit elder. And she moved back to Vienna and she did a wonderful research in the Austrian Workers' Chamber, conserving the work of Otto Bauer, was it? No, or Alfred Adler. I'm not, or Victor Adler, I'm not sure now, one of the both. And I think I wanted to mention Wanda Lanza before, because this is also a role women took to conserve the theories and the works of the men. And this is in our history not considered as a special work women did, and they are not honored for that. So therefore I had Wanda Lanza before in my pictures, because I think that's very, very important. And that's a personal work that women are doing to translate their own life or to reflect their own life and to reflect, for example, the loss of a beloved person, like the husband, for example. But what we have now as a generation after this, we have a very well prepared work. We can go on working. So this is one of the greatest, I think, contributions of Wanda Lanza. I hope you agree, Mr. Gretke.
Yes, I do agree. And if I may, I will add 2 sentences.
Please.
She was also an accomplished economist. She studied economics and had her doctorate at the University of Vienna, one of the very first women ever to do that. It was in 1921 or 22. And her dissertation is on Marxian crisis theory.
Yes.
And she takes issue with both her mother and her, well, the husband of her mother, so with Otto and Helene Bauer. Very interesting study.
Yes, it's a wonderful study and very interesting
I
study.
just wanted to, can you,
Sorry,
thank you.
yeah,
I just wanted to interrupt you quickly because I see that another person wants to now, Barbara Serlot would like to take a floor, and we have 4 minutes left, so I would like to let her take the floor. Thank you. Barbara, please.
Just one little thing, because Käthe Leiter wasn't able to finish her study at Vienna because the University of Vienna didn't award doctorates in political science to either men or women until 1919.
Okay,
so it was not because
it was not a
woman.
women's. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I didn't know. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's very important. Thank you.
Yes, we have 3 minutes left. So if you would like to say something that you wanted, some concluding words, maybe Petra.
No, I think I've told you a lot. I think it would be very interesting to go on. And what I was very inspired with your invitation to go forward with that, to have a look on these women, what about their theoretical thinkings? Because I have to recognize that I'm normally fixed in the biographical data, which is a part of my work. I have to tell the story of the life. So I'm very dedicated to study when she was born, when she was married, when she moved, and so on, because it's part of my, so to say, handcraft. And I was really inspired to dedicate my point of view, or to dedicate my readings more to the theory, to the thinkings behind the life they really had to live in the everyday life, and to dedicate a little bit more power or interest in their theoretical positions. So this was, therefore, I thank you very much for the invitation, because I started to think about that.